Today I'm going to be talking to you about controlled articular rotations for the spine. Now, if you want to make sure you maximize movement throughout this controlled articular rotation, there's a couple of cues you want to keep in mind. The first thing that you want to start off with is keeping a slight wider base than normal. I like to go wider than my hips with my feet. Now this wider base gives me a little bit more control over my pelvis, so when I start to apply some rotation, I have a little bit more feedback to minimize any compensation through my hips. You can even straddle. I don't mind doing that either, because from here, if I just squeeze my glutes, there's not much rotation that can actually happen through my hips. Up to you though, but that's something you're going to want to keep in mind, especially as you start to rotate. Your base makes it easier or harder for you to be able to control this compensation. Now, when it comes to the rotation of this controlled articular rotation, there isn't much. That's important to remember, because you can fight in flexion and then start to rotate, and you can keep trying to rotate and keep going, but you're not going to get much. So in order to get more movement through those joints, you have to start to introduce a lateral flexion. Now, when you come into forward flexion and then rotation, you want to think about starting to dip your, in this example, left shoulder. So here I'm going down and left. As I start to dip my left shoulder back towards my back pocket, I almost want to think like the hand that's on my shoulder, I'm almost trying to push it back. So as I start to laterally flex, I'm also almost pushing it into rotation. That way I don't come out of that rotation when I laterally flex, which is a very common mistake in the cervical cars as well. So as you come into flexion, you pivot left, you start to dip that left shoulder back, but then you start to push with your hand to cue yourself to rotate a little bit more. Because from there, you're going to transition from this lateral flexion into extension as you come up and over to the opposite side. Now from here, when you're coming from this midpoint of extension towards the right side in this case, I'm going to make sure that I start to dip my right shoulder towards my back pocket, but as I do that, I'm still trying to rotate. Because then from here, I can start to transition my chest towards my right ankle. Now I'm here in rotation and flexion. Now I'm transitioning back into the starting position. Okay, so just to quickly review, now I'm going to go down and right, forward flex, pivot the chest towards an ankle, in this case my right ankle. I'm going to start to laterally flex. As I laterally flex, I continue to try and rotate. I like to use my hand on my shoulder to cue myself. Then I start to transition up and over the middle. When I hit this midpoint, I start to rotate. When I max out that rotation, I laterally flex, but still try and rotate more. So I'm dipping my left shoulder towards my back pocket. Now my chest comes towards my left ankle. And then I finish back where I started. All the while trying to keep my pelvis between my feet. So I'm not hinging, I'm not extending through my hips, right? I'm not kind of doing the hula hoop here. My goal is to try and make sure I keep as much motion in the spine as possible without letting it leak anywhere else. And another cue that you want to keep in mind as you go through this controlled articular rotation is to visualize as if you have a laser sticking out of your chest. The reason I say that is because if you use your chest as a point of reference for where you are in the car, it's going to give you feedback as to whether or not you're coming out of rotation when you transition to extension. So think about it this way. If your chest is, or that laser is coming down and out, and you start to laterally flex, and all of a sudden that laser starts to point back forward, you know that you laterally flex and came out of that rotation, right? So you want to think about, if you're trying to draw this circle that you're trying to create, you're drawing it with that laser coming out of your chest. So even if I come down and out and I start to laterally flex, I'm still trying to keep my chest pointed out to the side so I can continue to draw a nice big circle without losing or coming out of those motions that I'm working so hard to try and and improve using this controlled articular rotation. So that's spine cars and how you go about cueing it to maximize movement throughout the joints involved. Hope you like it. I'll see you next time.